Welcome back. Tonight's video features two stories from Reddit, each strange in its own way, both lingering long after they end. Whether you're winding down, cooking, or just passing the time, these tales will keep you company. Let's begin. Sweet Summer Child. I used to work at this corner pub in a small Minnesota town. More of a bistro, I suppose, but it's always been called a pub. I mostly handled orders, cleaning, and mixing the occasional drink. I was pretty much the only one working there apart from the two owners, an older couple in their 70s. I thought about looking for another job, but the owners had made it clear that if I stayed to help out, I'd be first in line to buy the place for cheap once they retired. It was a good deal. But working in a place like that takes some time getting used to. There are plenty of locals to get to know, and you have to understand who's who and who does what. And while most of these people are harmless and quirky, there was that one couple who just rubbed me the wrong way. I want to share my experience with these people. For some, consider this a warning. For others, it might answer a couple of questions you didn't know you had. Pat and Angela Fisher were a couple of locals who only showed up once per year. They usually kept to themselves. You might spot one of them out shopping for groceries or getting gas for their car, but they weren't really the socializing type. There'd been a lot of speculation as to what their deal really was. Some thought they were religious nutcases, while others thought they might hold some extreme political views. Personally, I wasn't sure. They seemed harmless enough. The Fishers visit our pub once per year. They get dressed up and go out for a bite to eat. Those who have lived in this town long enough know that they do have a daughter, Alina, but that she never goes out with them. Not even on nice nights like this. You can see her as you drive by their house sometimes, but most people had no idea they even had a child. I'd worked at that pub for 5 years when, once again, the Fishers walked in. Pat had dressed up in a brown blazer with a black shirt, while Angela had this plain white summer dress. And as always, Alina wasn't with them. Still, it seemed to be some kind of special occasion. I walked up to them and tried making some small talk about being dressed up and wished them a lovely evening. They gave me nothing to work with, no hint at what they were doing or why. They just ordered their meal and sat, in silence, looking out the window. I snuck back into the kitchen and mentioned it to the owners. They rolled their eyes at me. "They've done this every year since their girl was born," the old woman said. "I think it's a birthday thing." I let my curiosity get the better of me. My final interaction with the couple was casually asking them how Alina was doing. Without skipping a beat, Angela answered. She didn't even look up from the table. "She's fine, everything's fine," and that was that. Discussion over. The Fishers had a simple meal and a glass of red wine each. As soon as they finished, they paid with cash, gave a decent enough tip, and left. They seemed to be in a hurry, so I tried my best not to get in their way. Still, I couldn't help being curious. Everyone knows there is something strange about the Fishers, but no one really knows what or why. As we closed for the night, I cleaned out the booth where the Fishers had been sitting. I noticed something unusual, Angela's purse. She'd put it aside at the beginning of the meal and must have forgotten about it. I was going to return it, obviously, but a part of me couldn't help but to look a bit closer. Maybe there was a hint as to what their deal was. I'm not proud of it, but I rummaged through that purse. But there wasn't much. A written phone number to some guy named Tom, a couple of loose bills, some makeup, tissues, and a couple of hundred in loose bills. That was pretty much it. No phone. I decided I'd give it back to them that same evening. I was feeling a bit guilty about looking through their personal belongings and figured I'd do something nice. Maybe they were just an odd couple. Maybe I was just being judgmental. After my shift, I got in my sky blue Nissan and made my way to the Fishers' house. I see it every time I go to work. It's not too far off my route. It was about 10 p.m. when I stopped in their driveway. I figured I'd just be in and out, so I didn't bother to lock it. I left it in the driveway, along with my take-home leftovers. I left my phone there too. It was charging. The Fishers had a nice home. A large 2-story house with a separate garage and a small guest house out back. I've always loved the color of it, a mellow green with white edges. Kinda clashed a bit with the blue sunflowers in their front garden though. The moment I reached their door, I could hear a rumble in the sky. It was shaping up to be a rainy night. I looked for a doorbell but couldn't find one, so I knocked on the door. Something in the air shifted, a sudden lack of sound, as if there'd been a noise coming from inside that I only barely registered, which stopped with my knock. Were they talking? Pat opened the door a bit, but it was stopped by a chain. His eyes went wide. I immediately got the impression that there was some urgency to this. "Yes," he said, "just here to give back the Mrs. Purse," I smiled. "You forgot it at the yes, of course," he interrupted. "Thank you." He reached out and grabbed it through the gap in the door. Just as he was about to close the door, I heard the screech of a chair being suddenly moved across the floor. I caught a glimpse of someone. Then the door slammed in my face. I figured that was just Alina in the background, so without thinking too much about it, I blurted out, "Good to see you, Alina." "Have a good one." I turned to get back to my car before the rain came, but there was a click at the door. Pat threw the door wide open, calling out to me. "Wait," he said. "Sorry, I was being rude. I'm sorry about that." "No problem," I shrugged. "Y'all have a good one." "No, I can't accept that," he chuckled. "Why don't you come in? We're having some rhubarb pie." "That's all right, but thank you. I'm sure Alina would appreciate the company." I had another look at him, and then back at my car. Every polite bone in my body was screaming at me to just accept, but another part of me just wanted to leave. Even now, I couldn't help but to think there was something off with the Fishers. Even at the expense of homemade rhubarb pie. "Tell her I said hi," I smiled, and got back in my car. The rain was coming. I saw Pat get back inside the house as I put the keys in and fiddled around with the wipers. I made sure the alarm was off. It can get a bit glitchy at times. Looking straight ahead, I noticed Pat Fisher coming back outside, holding something. Someone was screaming from inside the house. "Honey, wait." "Wait," she didn't. Pat Fisher raised a pump-action shotgun, and my ears were ringing before I saw the muzzle flash. I threw my hands up as a barrage of shotgun slugs blew holes into the hood of my car. Moments later, the car door flew open. I was staring down the barrel of a gun with an anxious Pat Fisher on the other end. He was close enough for me to see the specks of rain on his glasses. "Out," he screamed. "Out. Now." His wife was standing in the doorway, screaming herself hoarse. I just held my arms over my head, kept my face down, and did as I was told. My ears were screaming. It was as if something inside my ears had been cut by the noise of ripped metal. "We can't do this," Angela screamed. "We can't do this." "It's too soon. What choice do I have?" Pat screamed back. She saw her, she fucking saw her. It's as if my legs had forgotten they could move, so Pat dragged me out by the ponytail. Cold mud soaked into my pants as my knees hit the ground, and I was pulled up. With a gun barrel pressing into my lower back, he pushed me forward. Back towards the house. Now, in the moment, I couldn't really focus. My mind was running circles around me, trying to figure out what the hell was going on. But looking back at it, there was really nothing to give away just how strange the Fishers really were. There were pictures on the walls, a sign in the kitchen expressing love for the home, neatly vacuumed carpets and well-worn wallpaper. They'd lived there for a long time, and it showed, but in the way that makes you think of a proper home. And now, that illusion was shattered. I was pushed to the floor, my muddy jeans staining the flowery hallway carpet. "We got years left, Pat, years," Angela cried. "We can't do this." "Not now. It's too late and we're dealing with it," Pat screamed back. "If you just kept her in the kitchen, we wouldn't be." They both quieted down and looked around. Angela hurried down the back corridor, into the washing room. Moments later, there was a struggle. Someone pleading and Angela protesting in turn. Pat was anxious to go help, but he couldn't let me out of his sight. Instead, he just stood there, calling out to his wife. Seconds later, Angela returned. She had wrapped her arms around Alina, who looked to be around 14, maybe 15 years old. She had shoulder-length brown hair, a black t-shirt, and a pair of faded jeans. This was probably the first time I'd seen her up close. Alina was screaming at her mother to let her go, while Angela tried desperately to calm her down, hushing and hugging her. Alina was having none of it. "They're there, sweet summer child," Angela groaned. "They're there." After a short struggle, Elena realized she was going nowhere. For a moment, we all just stopped. The hallway echoed with struggling breaths as we all looked at one another, Angela still having her arms wrapped around her daughter. "Upstairs," said Pat, "one at a time." Elena looked at Pat in complete disbelief, then she noticed the shotgun. Her eyes widened. She didn't say anything as the two of us were slowly led upstairs. Angela stayed behind her husband, peering over his shoulder. "We'll figure this out," Angela pleaded. "It'll be okay, just give us a minute, okay? Okay?" I didn't say anything. I just looked back at Elena, who seemed as confused as I was. We were pushed into a small guest room on the top floor. I could tell someone had been living there for some time. The air was stale, but most notable were the iron bars welded to the window. They had no intention of letting us out of that room anytime soon. The moment we stepped inside, Angela apologized as the door slammed shut. There was a set of locks on the outside, all clicking, one by one. As the rain outside kicked up, we could hear the wind howling. The house groaned as it withstood the pressure, causing little creaks and cracking in the wall and ceiling. Elena sunk down onto her bed, burying her face in her hands. I reached for my cell phone, only to realize I'd left it charging in the passenger seat, right next to my leftover dinner. "Do you know these people?" Elena asked. It took me a moment to register her question. I looked at her, trying to understand. "Why, yeah," I said. "Don't you?" Turns out this wasn't Alana Fisher. This was a girl named River. She was 14 years old and originally came from a small community just north of Phoenix, Arizona. She had only known the Fishers for a couple of weeks. Turns out she'd been abducted. She had no idea what was going on, but at least she was unharmed. According to River, there was no one else in the house. There was no Elena, and she couldn't understand why everyone was calling her that. She tried to get out, but the Fishers had the place on lockdown. "I have no idea why they're doing this," she admitted. I have no idea. "They don't tell me anything." "Have they taken anyone else?" I asked. "Anyone but you or me?" She shook her head. "But I hear them talking sometimes," she said. "Look." She leaned against the far wall, pressing her ear against it. I followed her lead, and I could hear muffled voices from down below. There had to be some sort of ventilation leading past the kitchen, carrying their voices through the walls. Pat and Angela were talking about something being too soon, and mentioned something about 4 years left. I tried to piece it together. I looked around the room. It was a repurposed childhood room, it seemed. The wallpaper was still brightly colored butterflies, and there were little notches on the side of the doorframe, the kind you make to check how much someone has grown year for year. But the notches stopped after 3 years. After that, nothing. Considering everything I'd heard about Elena Fisher, she was a pale young girl with shoulder-length brown hair, but that was pretty much the extent of what I knew. River fit that category really well, but so did a lot of girls. "They said they would let me go," River explained. "I just have to stay a little longer." "Did they say how long?" "A couple of weeks," she sighed, "but that was weeks ago." "Wait, so you were here all day?" "While they were out for dinner. They locked me in the bathroom," she nodded. "They were going to meet someone, and then they were going out. Seemed like a big deal." The note in Angela's purse came to mind. "This Tom fellow, an accomplice." About half an hour passed. Then, suddenly, there were footsteps coming up the stairs. I could hear Angela pleading and Pat responding. "We can't keep her for 4 years," he yelled back down. "We can't, but we can't just." My head was rushing in 3 directions at once. I thought about hiding, attacking, rushing past him, but ultimately, I did nothing. River and I just lined up against the wall, as far away from the door as possible. When Pat entered, I could tell he was unstable. His hands were shaking, and he had the finger on the trigger. "You," he said, nodding at me. "Out now." Angela stood to the side, her arms crossed. Pat led me downstairs and out the back door through the washing room. No one said a word. By now, the rain was pouring down. My hair got stuck to my face, stinging my eyes. The ground smelled of wet dirt and some sort of chemical. Maybe ammonia. The rain was relentless. I could hear Angela calling something out from the house, but I couldn't hear what. Pat cocked the shotgun and spoke, seemingly to himself. "We've gone too far to stop now," he said. We can't stop now. I looked up at him, only to see the gun pointed my way. This was it. He was doing it. In that final moment, my mind was just racing with possibilities and last-second attempts, but I couldn't bring myself to believe that this was actually happening. I was locked into this role of an onlooker, seeing myself through my own eyes, incapable of believing I was the one on the chopping block. His eyes locked with mine. He was terrified. Angela called out again, and Pat's eyes darted to the side. She repeated something. His eyes wavered as he looked back at her. "What? He can use her," she called back. "We can give her to him and he can use her." Why? Angela was hurrying outside, covering her head with a jacket. As she ran up to Pat, I tried to get out of the dirt, but he just turned his attention right back to me. I couldn't provoke him further. If he can take her, we don't have to worry. We don't have to deal with this. And what if he does? Then we deal with it, Angela nodded. But if we don't have to, that's... Yeah, sighed Pat. Yeah, that's good. We'll do that. As the two of them spoke, I looked around. We were in the backyard. At first, I thought it was a garden, but nothing was growing. There were little wooden markers placed in rows of 5 for a total of 10, all of them numbered from 4 to 13. I looked down, pressing my hand into the dirt. Not too far to my right was another marker, with a 14 written. The soil there was harder, and there was a shovel resting next to it. What the hell had they done? I was lead back inside. Angela was standing off to the side, rocking back and forth. I could tell she was stressed out of her mind. She was looking at something on the wall, a wooden mallet. A one-handed wooden mallet hanging right over the washing machine. It had 10 black notches on the handle. Same number as the markers out back. "Sweet summer child," Angela wept. "You're coming home, sweet summer child." I was lead back upstairs, and Pat threw a towel at me to dry off with. As I was reunited with River, I couldn't stop myself from weeping. All that fear that I'd been putting off hit me like a truck, and my entire body felt like it was shutting down. It was just this all-consuming, singular-focused fear. To go from this dissociating mindset to the full realization of what had been about to happen is unreal. I told River all I'd seen out there, the markers, the mallet. And taking everything into account, I tried to surmise my thoughts. They were doing something they had done before, possibly as many as 10 times. They were going to do it again, and possibly up to 4 more times. They had some kind of accomplice. All these bits and pieces were starting to paint a picture. River was barely paying attention as she looked out the window, shaking her head. "Don't you get it?" she said shakily. "Just look. What does it look like?" I moved over to the window and looked outside. Neat rows with 5 markers each. It could just be one thing. "Graves," I said. "It looks like graves." We had to do something, anything. And as a bolt of lightning sailed across the sky, River had an idea. We counted down the seconds until we heard the thunderclap. Then, with River as a spotter, we carefully flipped a chair at the far end of the room and got ready. Timed with the next thunderclap, I broke off one of the chair legs, a makeshift weapon, if anything. River pointed out that the storm was moving too much. We had to skip the next strike, as we couldn't figure out the timing. But by the 3rd strike, we broke off one more leg. Leaning against the wall earlier, I realized that it was pretty thin. We took off our shoes and used our chair legs as a sort of chisel. One of the walls was made of gypsum, so there was a chance we might be able to punch a hole into the next room over. But we had to be clever about it, counting down the seconds, striking at once, and being sure to count every other strike. We had to be slow, methodical, and precise. It took some time, but the storm wasn't going away anytime soon. We managed to punch a small hole through to the next room, just large enough for River to crawl through. Seconds later, she'd gone around and unlocked the door from the outside. I made my way out, quietly. There was no doubt in my mind that Pat would shoot the 2 of us if he saw us. But before I could do anything else, River showed me to the room she'd crawled into, a small storage space. Apart from the occasional piece of furniture, most of the things in there were meant for a small child or a toddler. I wasn't surprised, but River was pointing at something specific, a pile of picture frames. Elena, 1 year old. Elena, 2 years old. Elena, 3 years old, then nothing. She didn't make it to 4, River whispered. So, what did they? We both fell silent. There was more to this, but I couldn't figure it out. Not yet. We could hear them talking downstairs. Something about a stranger showing up in the morning. Just one more night, Angela pleaded. Pat wasn't convinced, but reluctantly seemed to agree. As they talked, we considered going through one of the windows. Making our way to the end of the upstairs hallway, we found the Fishers' bedroom, all neatly organized and clean. We snuck up to the window and cracked it open. Using my arm, I helped River climb out. She had to do a bit of a jump, but it wasn't all too bad, and she landed in soft soil. But as I turned to climb out, I could hear the conversation downstairs was ending. They were moving around. I pointed at River and waved her off, silently begging her to go get help. Then I shut the window and hurried back to the room. There was no time. I had to hide. I propped up my jacket and a pillow in the bed in the room to make it look like River was sleeping, and I hid the broken chair behind the door. I figured if I stood far enough to the right, they wouldn't see the small hole in the wall at ground level. It was a long shot, but it just might work. But as I got back to the room, there was one thing I hadn't counted on: the lock. There was no way for me to lock the door from inside, and before I could even begin to figure it out, Angela came through the door. Angela looked over at the sleeping River and put down 2 plates of something warm, along with 2 bottles of water. She looked at the door a couple of times, as if trying to make sense of what she was looking at. I think she concluded that Pat must have forgotten to lock it, and that we must have missed it. After all, why else would I still be in that room? It'll be over by morning, Angela whispered. I'm sorry. About all of this, I said nothing. I just grabbed one of the plates, poked around at it, and waited for her to leave. She did, making sure to properly lock the door this time. I figured I'd make another escape attempt, but Angela was waiting right outside. I could have expanded on the hole in the wall and made my way out, but the storm was moving away, and without a clear idea of where they were, I might screw it up. Then again, what choice did I have? About an hour passed. I'd gone through 100 plans in my head, but nothing seemed plausible anymore. That I'd gotten River out at all was nothing short of a miracle, one not very likely to be repeated. But there was a sound that snapped me out of my thoughts. A car alarm. My car alarm. Did River start it? My keys were still in the ignition, after all. Moments later, there was chaos outside, someone scrambling up and down the stairs, shouting. A door slamming. I used the diversion to punch through the hole in the wall to the storage room, making my way out into the hallway. The path was clear. I decided to head for the back door. I didn't want to jump from a window and get a sprained ankle unless absolutely necessary. If I had to get away in a hurry, an injury would be a death sentence. Peeking around the corner, the stairs were clear. I hurried downstairs, through the washing room and out the back door, only to end up face to face with Angela Fisher standing in the rain. For a moment, we just looked at one another. We didn't know what to do. My instinct was to run, hers was to call for help. But as soon as she opened her mouth, all that came out was this awful crunching noise. I hadn't noticed River sneaking up on her, wielding the garden shovel. Angela got the back of her head bashed in. It was like turning off a light, and she just fell, face forward, straight into the dirt, not too far from the 14 marker. There was no time to think. I grabbed River by the hand and beelined for the woods. We barely made it to the tree line before I heard this painful death wail. You never forget that kind of scream, the emotional equivalent of having your heart torn out of your chest. Pat had found his wife. Holding River by the hand, we made our way through the underbrush and into the woods. The rain made every branch, root, and rock slippery. Leaves stuck to my face and clothes, but we pressed on. Every now and then we'd hear a distant scream, sometimes coming closer, other times seeming impossibly far away. Then, a gunshot. We threw ourselves to the ground, covering our heads. We crawled to safety behind a large rock, listening intently to where the shot came from. Pat was rambling. Screaming, really, to himself. 1 life for every year, that's what he wanted, he cried. 1 year until she'd be old enough to care for herself. To care for herself where we could, we've made it so far. You can't take this away from us. You can't. River held my arm tight as we listened. We could barely hear anything over the rain, but I could tell the general direction. He was coming our way. He comes every year, and every year we do it right. We've done it right. We've done everything right. He was getting closer. River and I looked at one another, but there was nowhere left to go. Just getting up would expose us. All we could do was stay down and wait, hoping for Pat and the storm to pass. But we weren't so lucky. Pat stepped out next to us, panting like an animal. He turned to us as if knowing exactly where we were hiding. Despite the rain, I could tell he'd been crying. He raised the shotgun towards us yet again, wailing like a wounded animal. Click. Nothing, maybe he forgot to cock it. Maybe he was out of slugs. Either way, our hearts skipped a beat, and I burst into action. I grabbed River's shovel, got up, and swung for the fences. The shovel connected with Pat's hand, breaking 3 fingers. A moment later, we were in an all-out brawl. Punching, kicking, biting, strangling. And it wasn't over until River finished it with a large rock coming down on his head. Only then could I hear the rain again, but my ears kept ringing with Pat's wailing scream long after he went quiet for the last time. I can still hear it, if I listen close enough. It was a long walk, a desperate call for help, but by morning we were safe. Now, I'm sure some of you have heard of this. Maybe it rings a bell. The articles talked about an isolated couple who had no less than 10 bodies buried on their property. A mad way of grieving for a lost child who never made it to 4 years old. Most of the articles didn't mention kidnappings or how they were killed. I never saw my name or River's, thankfully. There was one statewide newspaper who mentioned 2 bystanders being responsible for bringing this to the authorities' attention. Last I heard of River, she was reunited with her family back in Arizona. I'm still working at the pub. This all took place some time ago, and I've done my best not to talk too much about it or dwell on it. I still get panic attacks thinking about that gun pointed at my face, and I can still hear wailing screams at night. But apart from that, I'm okay, at least physically. But not too long ago, a man walked in. I hadn't seen him before, but he was impossible to miss. The man was at least 67 and wore all black. White hair and these intense, terrifying blue eyes. He had lunch, introducing himself as Tom, and asked me a couple of brief questions about the Fishers. As he finished up, he smiled at me, leaving me with a final cryptic message. Some folks will do anything for their sweet summer child. I picked up the worst hitchhiker ever. Every job has 2 sets of rules. The first set can usually be figured out with a bit of common sense, and when that fails, you can ask Google or some shit. But the second set? Well, those rules are special. You have to earn the right to hear them. There is no easy way around that. You have to put in your time like the rest of us, and eventually one of your seniors will let you in on the hidden knowledge. Let me ask you something though. Would you still follow the rules if nothing ever happened when you broke them? Would you ever be tempted to see why they exist in the first place? I have been a trucker for nearly 30 years. In that span, I have damn near broke every secret rule I was told. I don't know why. I guess I never cared much for procedure or rules or anything like that. Just give me a 2-liter of Coke Zero, my truck, and the open road. Anything more than that is just extra bullshit I don't get paid enough to deal with. So yeah, I did eat jerky every single time I drove down Road 58. No, I never stopped to piss on the elder tree on my way to Montana. And you're damn right, I don't toss a perfectly good pack of cigs out the window at the end of every haul. As it turns out though, the rules do exist for a reason. I was a fool for ever thinking otherwise. It all started with someone banging on my truck door in the early morning. I had gotten absolutely plastered the night before, and it was a miracle they were able to wake me up. I shouted something back, can't remember what. Then I laid there and considered whether I was lonely enough tonight to tousle with some reptiles. I stumbled out of bed and pushed the door open. The air was cool against my bare chest. My vision was still a bit blurry, but I did manage to say, "Listen here, Lizzie, I only got 40. Wasn't Lizzie on the lot. Instead, there stood a fella. That was a first. He was tall and lanky, bony too, like he lacked muscle completely and was just skin pulled tightly over bone. reminded me a tad of those European models I've seen on the cover of gas station magazines. He wore one of them bowler hats and altogether was a bit too clean to be any sort of honest man. In his hand, he carried a briefcase of fine, glossy leather. "Aw, hell no. Listen, fella, I know times are a-changin', and trust me, I support that. But this cowboy prefers roast beef over sausage if you catch my drift." The man chuckled, then lifted his hat. His hair was the color of good wheat beneath the midday sun. Wild, too. Behind gold spectacles, he had bright blue eyes. Calculating, sunken eyes. I figured he was either a cop or one of those car salesmen that gets all giddy at the prospect of fucking a first-time buyer over. "Sorry for waking you, friend. I tried the other semi-trucks before heading over here, but no one answered. My name is Samuel, and I am in a bit of a pickle. I had a, how would you say, falling out with my business partner. We were on a trip to California to conduct some research for our firm. I must say that, unfortunately, our partnership is now dissolved. But I still need to get to California. Would you happen to be on your way there?" There were several other truckers parked at the rest stop, sticklers for the rules to be sure. I chuckled, which brought a concerned look to Samuel's face. "I reckon you scared the daylights out of those poor men. In our trade, there is a rule about not opening the door between the hours of 4 and 6 in the morning in this here lot. Is this a dangerous area? I thought things looked reasonably safe. Ever had the soul drained out of you by a she-devil?" I asked solemnly. Samuel stared at me in shock. I laughed at his unblinking gaze. "Oh. You're joking with me," he said. "Well, it's a real issue. I suspect that rule was made up to keep these fellas safe from themselves," I said solemnly. I took Samuel's measure in that moment. He seemed like he took himself a bit too seriously, and I definitely wasn't a fan of the fact that he hadn't blinked once since I first saw him, but I didn't see him as much of a threat. Not then. "To answer your question, yeah, I am headed to California," I said after a long silence. "What kind of business are you in?" "I am a lawyer. I mainly deal in contracts." "It's my specialty," he said evenly. "A lawyer? Well then, why aren't you flying your pretty ass to law in first class?" "Fly? Me? Certainly not. I have had the worst fear of heights ever since I suffered a particularly nasty fall. No, I am a creature of the road, friend." I pretended like I was deep in thought about whether I should bring Samuel. I had helped people out before, but ever since a certain incident involving a man who was actually running from the law hitching a ride with me, I have been more hesitant about giving people rides. "I am prepared to offer you $1,000 for safe passage. $500 up front and the rest once we arrive in California. Additionally, I will pay for your food and drink on the way there. Make it $1,500 and you have a deal." Now it was Samuel's turn to laugh. $1,500, but you need to take me to Lowe's Angels." I shook his well-manicured hand and resisted curling my lips at how soft it was. "Sure. Go ahead and use the restroom and get whatever you need from the gas station over that way. Tell them Mike sent ya. They'll take care of everything. We leave in 2 hours. Make sure you are ready." I went back into my truck and tried to sleep. Didn't work out too well. I had the worst nightmares. They kept forcing me awake every 15 minutes or so. Drenched in sweat with my heart racing at what felt like 100 miles per hour, I decided to get ready, hoping that routine would take my mind elsewhere. Outside, Samuel was staring at something on the ground. Clouds of smoke gathered above his head and dissipated. He turned and looked directly at me. I snorted, then finished the last of a lukewarm energy drink from the other day. "Sheet," I said after joining Samuel. Several baby birds, still blue-pink, lay in a pile. "Indeed," said Samuel, "what a cruel world." I scratched at my beard. City boy's man. "Nothing cruel here, I reckon, just a fact of life." He regarded me coolly, hands clasped behind his back. "You don't believe in evil?" "Nah, I mean it sucks to see a little critter die before it ever gets to fly. But all that talk about good and evil, well, I figure we made it up. Moralized nature to give us some sort of control or power over it. I doubt these birdies were cursing their fate. They felt some cold and some hunger and then whelp. That was it." Samuel didn't reply. He took another pull on his cigarette. Something in me really didn't like the way he looked at those birds. We got into the truck. Samuel had gotten me a bottle of Coke Zero and some Doritos. I thanked him, though he didn't answer. His eyes were distant and cold. As we pulled out from the lot, I waved at another trucker who was barely coming out of his vehicle. Poor guy looked terrified. It was either his first time haulin', or he was coming down from something. My new companion didn't say much as we drove down the highway, just stared out the window. I felt him staring at me whenever he thought I wasn't looking, though. Definitely an odd fella. You're probably wondering why the hell I allowed him to stay at that point, and the truth is, I was lonely. It's nice to have company beyond the radio on these longer hauls. So I didn't press him on the matter. I pointed out different sites and shared a bit about myself. He didn't do the same. Then, about a few hours into the drive, he asked, "Do you like being alive?" I gave him a look. The fuck kinda question was that? Sure, buddy. I do, football, fajitas, and fucking. In that order, too. Those are what make life worth living for me. What about you? I'm guessing either those nature documentaries where the zebras get ate by lions or leaked footage from battlefields. I laughed in his face. Is that what makes you tick? Samuel pursed his full lips. I enjoy reading IRS tax publications. I also enjoy hunting. But most of my time is spent working. Christ almighty. Well, that's interesting. So why are you headed over to Los Angeles? What big business are you looking to break into over there? Have you been watching the news? Not really, I said. Samuel smiled. Can I confess something to you? Go for it. I asked whether you enjoyed your life because I am quite dissatisfied with my own. I shrugged. Well, that happens. That feeling won't last forever, though. Nothing does. I think my life would be a whole lot better if nobody else existed. I could enjoy a land of silence, be at peace. Imagine, if you will, a world of infinite space, no obstructions, utter flatness. Sounds like you want a whole lot of nothing, I said. Yes, Samuel whispered, nothing. I merged over into the middle lane and did my best to ignore him for the rest of the drive. He got more blatant with his staring, but I didn't give him the reaction he was looking for. You meet a lot of unsavory characters in this line of work. Comes with the territory. There are two kinds of people who seek solitude after all, mystics and devils. Never forget the latter vastly outweigh the former. We stopped for the evening, then headed over to a diner. As we neared, a shaggy dog with a bloom of silver around his muzzle pattered over to me. Don't pet it. It's filthy, Samuel said. Go on and get us a table. You're scaring the dog, I replied. I heard the door open and slam shut behind me. I shook my head and proceeded to scratch behind the shaggy dog's ears. Then I fed him a bit of jerky from my pocket. Good luck out there, old man. Yeah, I know you're capable. I meant no offense. But old guys like us need it, I told the dog. He licked my hand before trotting away. Samuel didn't look up from his menu. He only asked whether I had washed my hands. I ignored him. The lovely waitress came to our table a few minutes later, took our orders, and that was that. After she brought our food, Samuel leaned over and asked, "Are you ignoring me?" "Yeah, now shut the fuck up and eat your food." I saw the man bristle at that, but he stayed quiet. He stayed quiet and he stared. I excused myself and went over to the restroom. I decided to take my sweet time as it was gonna be a long ride with that weirdo. Then, while I was finishing up, I heard a commotion outside. The waitress from earlier was crying and repeating over and over that she didn't know how Samuel's wallet ended up in her apron. Samuel stood there with his arms crossed, shaking his head. "I am sorry, sir." "Truly, I don't want any trouble," said Jeb, the man who owned the diner. Samuel stepped closer and jabbed his finger into Jeb's chest. "That bitch stole my wallet. I had over $2,000 in there." "That is a felony, sir. I want her fired and gone." Jeb looked at the waitress sheepishly. Her eyes were wild and she was tugging at her hair. "Jeb, please, I didn't do it. You know me. Please, Jeb, I have kids to feed." "Then how did it get there, Patty?" Jeb asked. "What's going on here?" I said, not able to stand it any longer. Samuel grinned. "I caught a criminal in the act. Who knows what else she's stolen?" Jeb threw his hands up into the air. Okay, Becky. I'm sorry, but we caught you red-handed." "You're fired. Now get out of here before the kind lawyer here presses charges." He turned to Samuel, shoulders hunched. "Please, sir." We don't have a whole lot of money. You wouldn't get much out of suing us. These were simple folk Samuel was bullying. They didn't know anything about the law. Let's get out of here, Samuel, I grunted. He followed behind me so close I felt his breath against my neck. Then, when we were outside and far enough away from the diner, he said something that made me freeze in place. And that is how you get a free meal. I slowly turned around. Samuel stood there tall and dark with the desert behind him. He was smiling so wide his face practically contorted. "The hell did you say?" I gasped, so angry I could hardly speak. "I slipped the wallet into her apron while she refilled your coffee," he said gleefully. Those blue eyes of his were glowing like embers. I felt a chill run down my spine. She had kids to feed, man. You got her fired over $20. Are you out of your goddamn mind? "Oh, Michael, you have no idea," he growled. There was something feral in the cast of his face now. Something hungry. He took a step towards me. I clenched my fists and squared up to him. "You and I are done. Find a different way to California, you son of a bitch." "We had a deal," Samuel said. "Oh, really?" I raised an eyebrow, then spit at his feet. "I would have thought a fancy lawyer like you would have gotten that deal down in writing, so please produce it." "Oh, you don't have it? Well, I suppose that doesn't matter since you broke the terms. You see, you were supposed to pay for my food and drink per our agreement. You went back on that the moment you forced those poor folks back there to pay for our food." Samuel's lips peeled back, and I saw row upon row of pointed teeth spinning in place within that wide mouth. "This is a bad idea. You don't got the wit you think." I laughed while waving him goodbye. But secretly I was terrified of that man. I knew what he was now. He watched me as I got into my truck. I felt him watching even after I was safely inside. I didn't know why until I found the surprise he left for me on my bed. I don't think I have screamed like that since I was a boy. I grabbed a towel, threw it over his sick gift, and drove away as fast as I could. I would like to say my encounter with Samuel ended there, but it didn't. I see him now every time I pass through a crossroads. He smiles and holds up his briefcase as I drive past. I can't stop for too long anymore either, because I can hear him knocking on the door at night, asking where the shaggy dog is. Then I hear him laughing, which turns into barking exactly like that poor animal did, and all I can do at that moment is pray for someone to save me. All I can say is if you're gonna break the rules, make sure they are the right ones. That wraps up tonight's stories. If you enjoyed them, please like, subscribe, and share which one stuck with you most. I'll see you soon for more stories from the dark corners of Reddit. Until then, take care and keep an ear out for what moves in the quiet.